Hi there, Lauren Crawford, YogiLoren. So today I'd like to talk to you about Agni. Agni is the fancy Sanskrit word for fire. And the teachings on fire go back to the very beginnings of teachings for humanity in the Rig Veda. So the Rig Veda were a number of hymns that were shared by way of the oral tradition. And the first one was a hymn to the god of fire, Agni. And fire is the essence of life, essentially. So it's from there that everything else comes. Without fire within us, we are essentially dead. So fire is an important part of who and what we are. It's an important part of the yoga, tantra, and ayurveda traditions too. So what does it mean? What is this fire all about? Well, if we think of fire from the perspective, let's keep it simple. Think of a fireplace in your family room. If you light a fire there and you don't attend to it, it doesn't do very well, right? If you have a potbelly stove and you're heating a space, if you don't keep that fire content, you're not going to have a very successful heating regime. If you're camping and you need a fire to cook your food and to keep warm, if you don't attend to it, it's not going to serve you very well. Similarly, the fire within us, we need to be looking after it, right? So if we go to Ayurveda, for example, the sister science of yoga, the science of life, as it's sometimes called, it addresses fire via one of the doshas, these bio-spiritual principles. And Pitta dosha is the one that has the fire element in it. So if your Pitta dosha, for example, is out of whack and there's too much intensity of that fire within you, Ayurveda teaches us how to address that by way of diet, by way of lifestyle, making some changes to bring that robust fire to a place where it's operating at its most optimal level. That's what Ayurveda is all about, coming back to your own unique optimal level. So for example, if your fire is too high, if you're a Pitta person like me, this is a good example of what that looks like. Too much Pitta can be acid reflux. So a lot of acid starts to build up in the body. Rashes on the skin. So the heat comes to the surface of the skin and presents as rashes. You can have loose stool and ample amounts of that. So diarrhea, that's hot. That's fire. You can have a burning in the eyes. That too is fire. So these kinds of things, a warm body temperature, pittas just tend to be warmer by touch anyway. So a lot of fire builds up. And what that looks like on a mental level can be anger, agitation, kind of rudeness, assertiveness, and perhaps super judgy and not always so pleasant to be around. Fire itself, by its nature, is sharp. So think of sharp qualities, right? And when they're exacerbated, it's not pleasant for both the person who's actually living with that and the folks around. So we use cooling foods. We temper some of the heat in the food. So think of what are the foods that are going to be most aggravating? Hot, spicy foods, right? Fried foods will be problematic. Highly acidic foods will be problematic. Fermented foods, too much caffeine, too much alcohol. All of these things can aggravate. Even things like carbonated drinks, not so good. So we want to make sure that we reduce some of that type of food and bring in other more cooling foods, things that are sweet to the taste and have a cooling effect. I think a cilantro is one of those wonderful things that has a cooling quality when you mix it in with, stews or even curries and things like that can help to bring down some of the pitta-provoking qualities. We can do a whole discussion on foods. So foods we change, but also lifestyle. So Pitta people and that fire within them have a propensity towards intensity. So they like to commit to things. They like to have their projects. They like to do a lot. So what we want to do to sort of bring that fire down is maybe pare back on some of those projects. Maybe say no for once and allow, someone else to do the job. Maybe get out into nature, because nature is the most soothing and healing for Pitta. It's in that fire within us, right? It's very calming. And especially at nighttime, if you're out in the night and the moon is shining bright and you look up and you pause, it will have an immediate calming effect on fire, right? So that's an example of fire within us on the physical and mental level, for sure, because Pitta dosha isn't just physical, it's mental and it's even spiritual. But let's talk a little bit about that. So on the alchemy side of things, think of fire from an alchemic kind of point of view. Fire is this force that transforms, right? You put something into fire, you're not going to be able to retract it and have it in its own composition. Water, when heated, becomes steam. A piece of paper put into a fire becomes ash. A body that gets incinerated, it too becomes ash, right? So fire is, of its very essence and nature, transformative. And that's the spiritual side of this. It's super, super important, right? So we want to use those transformative elements of fire within to take us from where we are now to the place where we potentially can and should be, to take us to that place of our true potentiality. And that's the work of fire within, the Agni within. So how do we do that? How do we work with that? In yoga practice, we use things like asana. You know, the hot yoga is really, really popular, and there's a reason for that. I know people like the feeling good and the losing weight and all of those kinds of things, but it brings up that heat because in some way we know that heat can actually be really, really helpful, right? We don't want to overdo it. And that's a little bit of I would, bracket my statement there. We can really overdo those hot yoga experiences, but we do want to create an internal fire with our practice to burn off some of the dross, to burn off some of the energy that's kind of stuck in us, right? And that can mean a whole bunch of things, including, mental and emotional scarring that's in us, that keeps us stuck thinking a certain way, having certain narratives within us. There's that. So asana, pranayama, meditation. A beautiful technique that we do in the Himalayan tradition is Agnisara, deep abdominal churning to work with those forces in the gut. The gut is the primary source of fire within you in terms of how and what we work with. But remember, it's everywhere. It's throughout your being. It's at every single cell. There's firing going on at a cellular mitochondrial kind of level, right? So it's within us, of course, but there's this big part of it that's in our gut. So we do a lot of work there. And why do we do that? Because we want to remember who and what we truly, truly are. That we're not simply bodies having an experience on this earthly plane. We're spiritual beings having a earthly experience, right? And the earthly experience is really important. But when we remember that we aren't the sum total of this thing, that we're much bigger, and the fire within, the Agni within, we connect to the cosmic level of fire that's out there, because we are it is us, right? And when we begin to remember that, and it is a remembrance, right? When we begin to remember that's where we come from, that's where we're going, then all of the trappings of this contemporary, modern, privileged life that most of us live in the West, those trappings aren't so weighty, and we don't get so consumed by the daily shenanigans of life. And there's lots of them. There is. So we want to work with fire, Agni, to get beyond all of that stuff, to not remove ourselves from it, because we do have to still work. So ultimately, to have greater discernment, greater faculties to make choices in our lives that lead us to our higher selves, our higher being, our true potentiality, rather than keeping us stuck in misery, because that's what it can be. So those are some things we want to be thinking about when it comes to fire, and ultimately working from that perspective of when I'm on the mat, I'm doing more than just stretching my hamstring. If I'm eating in a way that's honoring my Pitta dosha, I'm going to get further ahead in my journey than if my body's all out of whack and I have too much of that fire internally. When I'm doing my spiritual work, whether you call it that or not, when you're doing that work of evolving as a human in this life that we're living, that too is the work of fire, this transformative nature of the fire element of Agni. So I hope that provides you at least with some food for thought. And you can look at more of this by way of learning about Agnisara as a technique and, studying up on the principle of Agni and what it means to you. I hope that was helpful, and we'll see you again next time. Be sure to comment if you'd like below in the comment section, and sign up to receive regular correspondence from me and even look at joining my membership. Great. See you soon.